They were on-duty air traffic controllers on the day the planes hit the towers. We're going to find out what those days were like for the controllers on this edition of In the Hangar. There are a lot of stories that came out of 9/11 on that fateful day. And one thing, as a pilot in the general aviation community, I haven't heard much from the controllers. So I'm very pleased today to have two guys who were working in the towers and in the TRACONs on that day. With me is Bill and Hugh. Bill, thanks for being with us, Hugh. So before we jump into it, let's start with you, Hugh, and tell me a little bit about yourself and what you've been doing.
Been a controller since '84. Worked at Forward Center for 33 years. Turned 56 last February, and not everybody may know, but when you turn 56 as a federal air traffic controller, you're done. You're fired. So retired. So I was happy to be retired. So that was February last year. So coming up on 1 year retired, and I highly recommend retirement.
So 56 for controllers, I didn't know that. I mean, pilots are gnashing their teeth at 65.
Right.
And, wow, I did not know.
Yeah, I have some airline friends that are jealous of me. So.
Okay, and then Bill, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm retired also. I retired in 2012, November 2012, from the DFW Approach Control. 22 years there. I worked at Burbank Approach in California for 8 years before that, and a couple years in the Air Force. And also have a pilot's license. Haven't flown pilot in command in years, but I've got to go flying with a couple controllers I've met, because I'm currently working in the control tower at Denton, and for RVA for a contract tower.
Okay, so for those people in the general aviation that don't quite understand, real quick breakdown for me, because you've mentioned you had to retire at 56, but you're still working. Tell me the difference between a private tower and an FAA tower.
So I never had a CTO, so I could never get that option. So
what's a CTO?
Go ahead.
A control tower operator. It's a certificate you get from the FAA for when you've worked in a tower. And I happen to work in the Air Force at Castle Air Force Base Tower and Burbank Tower. So when I retired from the FAA, I could apply for a job at RVA. When I retired from the FAA, I could apply for a job at RVA, which is Robinson Aviation. They run the contract towers for all of the South. Mesquite, Spinks, Arlington, Denton.
All those.
All of them are contract towers.
So if you were to go get your CTO, then you could apply for a job at a private tower.
There's no way I could privately go get a CTO. I would have had to get through the FAA or the military.
You have to be a FAA tower.
But I'm happy to be retired. It's a good time.
Okay.
I am too.
All right. So let's go now to 9/11. So you guys were working. Were you working tower? Were you working regional? Tell me. Let's start with you, Bill.
I was working in the TRACON. The biggest thing I remember is when the first plane hit, everybody was kind of like, what's going on? You had a little bit of stuff on TV. When the second one hit, everybody was just, in the TRACON, there's 12 positions open at any time, but there's 15, 17 controllers. And most of us were in the break room, a lot of us were in the break room, and we just stood and watched the TV. And then they gave the order to make planes land. We went in, worked quite a bit of airplane, worked quite a bit of traffic, watched the national airspace stuff and watched all the airplanes land, and then just went back to watching the TV, and it was just eerie all the way around.
What was the order that was given? So if I'd been a general aviation pilot that day and I just happened to be up tooling around, practicing whatever, what would I have heard from you guys?
From us, we probably just said that. I honestly don't remember the exact what we had to do or told people, but we just told people they had to land.
So if somebody was,
do you remember exactly what was given? I don't
that
remember.
part, no. It was a
if
national
somebody was
emergency.
going IFR through, were they just instructed to just land as soon as able?
Yeah.
Yeah, don't go to if your destination is way down the road, you're not going to make it. You land at the nearest practical airport.
So pilots that day, they just landed at whatever nearest practical airport.
Yeah, he probably got to do that a lot more than me because we were, local, just in the TRACON, but
Yeah.
he's center people.
So you were
somebody
center.
flying across
Right.
to go,
So let me go to that. You talk about that day. What happened that
So
morning?
I was working Texarkana High, which is an eastbound departure sector. Departures are going over Little Rock, Texarkana, Memphis, El Dorado, Shreveport. it's 24,000 and up. So the TRACON hands off to the low altitude sector. The low altitude sector climbs the airplanes to 23,000, hands them off to me, and then I climb them up to the final request altitude. And I remember we were just ramping up because of hub and spoke. We were in a busy departure push at the time, and I remember getting spooled up and working the radar side. I had a D side, which is a helper. He helps the landline communication. I remember somebody coming around the corner from a break said, "Hey, something's going on in the World Trade Center." It's like, I just kind of heard that a little bit because as controllers, you multitask. You want to hear what's going on around you. And he ran the brake list. So I don't need to explain a brake list, but he got to me and says, "Hey, would you like to take a break?" I like to work traffic, and normally I would have stayed there and worked it, but because of what he said coming around the corner, something's going on. I said, "Yeah, I want to take a break," because just like you, in our break room, which we had a cafeteria with a big screen TV, so I took the break, went down, saw the second airplane hit, and our breaks are about 30 minutes, so my break was over. I went back in, and by the time I went back, yeah.
I still get chills.
The heebie-jeebies, yeah.
Yep.
But went back into the control room, and it was my turn to run the brake list, and by that time, they were already telling airplanes to land. So I found a position to work. I do remember we have a sector called Monroe Low, which Barksdale Air Force Base is in that sector. Shreveport Approach controls that. And I remember after all the airplanes were landed, Air Force One came in without a flight plan in the computer, which is really unusual. Normally you'll put in the flight plan information and it generates automated flight progress strips. He came through with hand printed strips. So it means somebody in Memphis Center called Fort Worth Center, passed the flight plan information verbally, and we did handwritten strips, but nothing in the computer on that. And the Air Force One, I'd never seen, I worked him before, he had an F-15 on each wingtip, and that's when he had come from Florida and landed at Barksdale, stayed there for a couple hours, and then as you know, he went up to Offutt, and then they decided it was safe to go back to DC and went back to DC. So I got to experience, we're landing airplanes, got to see the president come into Barksdale, and as an aside, all these strips are coming off our printers, and I can say this now because I'm retired, they can't fire me. They said nothing leaves the building. Well, I was stuffing those strips in my pocket, and I wrapped them with a rubber band, and my dad's a retired aviator, and I think it's been 17 years? I do the math, whatever. I actually got those strips out for the first time last month. Spent Christmas with my family in Shreveport, and I was reading through those strips, and like you said, it was just like emotions came in, and I was reading some of the strips to my parents and whatnot, and it was kind of creepy what the messages that came off on the printers, like, this is a national emergency, ground all the airplanes. That came off as printed messages. So
That's neat. I did not know that. That's pretty cool. Yeah.
So do you have the strip from Air Force One? The handwritten one?
I don't have, no.
You didn't grab that one?
No.
That would be cool.
Right.
So if I were a general aviator pilot there at 10 o'clock on 9/11, what was I being told?
Well, like we discussed earlier, says you need to land. We could tell them it was a national emergency.
Well, I guess I'd have to be on center's frequency too. I guess if I'm just
Yeah, if you're
local.
uncontrolled, right.
So there's probably some pilots out there that ran around for a little while, not understanding
There
what
actually
going on.
was, and they had a fighter cap after that over DFW, 2 F-16s, and they had a fighter cap over Barksdale for a while, and they would go run intercepts. After the airspace was completely shut down, people that have their little farm strip or whatnot and don't talk to controllers, because you don't have to.
Right.
They didn't watch the news that day, like,
So
They got intercepted.
They got
so
intercepted.
intercepted. We ran quite a few intercepts.
wow.
In fact, we had a military presence in all of the centers for 1 year after 9/11 in fatigues. That's where we got the hotline to, it's called the Den, and everybody's on it, all the major facilities and the DOD. And that was, because of that, the FAA used to own all the long-range radars. Well, because of 9/11, those now belong to the United States military. So if we have issues with the radar, we have to coordinate with the military. But the creepiest briefing I ever got was several weeks after 9/11, we had an all-hands briefing. They closed the door in the briefing room, which that never happens. The military guy stands up and gives a briefing, and this is a secret level briefing. We have secret level clearances, which is the lowest level clearance for security. But he proceeded to brief us on how to vector a fighter to shoot down an airliner.
Oh my.
Because that was going to be in the bag of tricks. If somebody else tried to do that, we were taught how to run intercepts, come in behind so the airliner, so nobody in the airplane can see, and all I remember thinking was like, man, I hope I'm not that guy that has to vector to shoot at an airliner.
Absolutely.
Oh my
But,
goodness.
yeah, it was,
That's amazing.
it was surreal.
I didn't know that either. I hope you're amazed by this because I didn't even
Yeah.
know all this stuff. That's
Yeah.
pretty cool stuff.
But yeah, briefing, close the door. What's said in here stays in here. Wait, what? So,
Wow.
That's interesting. Yeah.
So what was it like then? I know that the airspace was totally shut down for what, 2 or 3 days?
Yeah.
So going to work, what was that like?
Just really, really weird. I mean, think about, well, for me, I drove from Denton to DFW and I come down Lake Lewis, 35E Louisville, and you always see airplanes in the sky. Everybody sees airplanes in the sky. And it's just a normal thing. And to drive for 2 or 3 days and not see a single airplane was just, for me, it was really weird because I'm like all these pilots that are out there. I like airplanes. And to not see any in the air, that was just really weird.
What was it like at Center and Tracon?
well, I had a midnight shift that night, so I got off at 2:30 the day of 9/11. It was my 4th day back, so your 5th day back as a controller, at least in the center, you either work a mid shift or come back the next day on a morning shift. So I got off at 2:30, got to go home, take a power nap because my shift starts at 10:30 that night. And I live in Mansfield on the south side, so I come up Highway 360, which is either the final
Right on
approach
the
or the
final,
departure quarter. And again, same thing. There's nothing. And you notice that when there's, because it's just background noise.
I
You're used
noticed
to
it, and I wasn't even a pilot at the time.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I go in and plug in on the mid. There's nothing except for 2 F-16s over DFW and a tanker.
What altitude were they? Were they really high?
They were in the low 20s,
20, okay.
but they'd fly for hour and a half, go hit the tanker, refuel, and they'd do that for, 4 or 5 hours, and they'd send up replacement fighters, and as soon as they got on station, the 2 that were on station left, and we had fighter caps for a long time.
So during those few days right after 9/11, when the airspace was closed, was that the only traffic you
That
dealt
was
with?
it.
The Tracon,
Except
we
for
did
the little
nothing.
guy that jumped off the airport that didn't
Well, I was
watch
going to
the
ask you,
news.
did
Yeah.
anybody do that?
Yes.
A
Oh, yeah.
lot?
Not a whole lot,
No.
but yeah, it happened.
The big
And then
thing,
you'd be talking to the
Yeah.
cap, and
Well, and we had the military presence in the building, so
Oh, they would know.
So there was a lot of coordination going on. And said, do we want to intercept them or not? And they'd say, yeah. So send them.
wow.
the one intercept I remember was there was rumor the airspace was going to open up, I think 3 days afterwards. And that was on the news that they think the airspace is going to, well, apparently pilots heard it is going to open up. So I think I know the pilot. I think I've met this pilot that did this in the recent past. He took off from an airport and was flying up near Denton. And I was at work in the Tracon. My wife was home. She calls me at work and says, "What's going on? I hear fighters going around." Because they intercepted this little plane up there by Denton. 2 F-16s. They met him. I don't think they were cap guns. I think they came from Carswell, if I remember right that day. But they were screaming, and their airspace was not open. But this guy thought it was. And
Well, guys, thank you so much for keeping us safe in the air, especially that day. And thanks for coming in. Bill, Hugh, thank you so
Thanks
much.
for having us.
Okay, as always, if you like this show, share, like, and subscribe, and as always, watch. And we'll see you next time in the hangar.